Welcome to the Millionaire University podcast. I'm your host, Brian Guerin, with you today. And on this edition of the MU Pod, I am joined again by my friend Brian O'Connor. He's the owner of Talent HQ, an overseas talent placement company, as well as being a fractional CMO. And, he's also, if you remember back from our previous episode with Brian, he's a digital nomad. He's been to and through nearly 20 countries, and he's already in a whole new country compared to when we interviewed him the first time. He's now in Buenos Aires. And what we're going to be talking about today, and what I'm really excited to unpack with him, amongst other things, is going to be how he built a massive following across multiple platforms with 85,000 followers across X and LinkedIn, plus another 14,000 newsletter subscribers. Brian, welcome back to the show, my friend.
Excited to be here, Brian.
Awesome, dude. Well, first of all, we want to talk about your origin story. I know we talked about that in our first episode, but there may be a lot of new listeners here who haven't yet heard that episode. And folks, do go back and check that out in our library. Brian O'Connor talking about his Talent HQ business. But I want to rehash that origin story because it's pretty awesome. And I think it will be reflective of a lot of people who are listening to us today, being a former 9-to-5er, if you will, working in corporate America, moving into consultancy. So Brian, let's hear a little bit of your origin story again, kind of set it up for what we're going to talk about in terms of hopping into entrepreneurship and building a following of multiple thousands of people.
Absolutely. So I had that traditional 9-to-5, right? I was in a cubicle, like typing away all day. I ended up moving into management consulting, which is amazing. I mean, I loved it. The opportunity, I was able to work with executives of Fortune 500 companies and figure out kind of where they should move their business, right? So one project I worked on, should we launch a new investment bank in Brazil, as an example, right? So I'm in boardrooms advising executives, and a friend of mine asked me, hey, that advice you're giving executives, I've got a friend who's an entrepreneur, you need some help, can you just give them that advice on the side? I said, sure. And when I talked to him, it seemed like it was pretty, things that frameworks we use with the Fortune 500s are pretty straightforward, but it felt like it wasn't accessible to a small business owner, to an entrepreneur. And so those things that we kind of took for granted were deal breakers and change his life essentially, because he put everything into the business, and if his business fails, he fails. And so I had that aha moment when I talked to him that those simple frameworks changed his life. Whereas on the corporate side, it was just felt like I was a cog in the wheel. It was I was helping a whole corporation. So I started taking those frameworks and just taking what we were talking about in the boardrooms, putting it on Twitter and trying to share it with everybody. I wanted it to be accessible to everyone. And that took off. So I grew my Twitter and LinkedIn following to 85,000 followers. And from that, I had a lot of business owners reaching out, asking for advice and consulting. That business took off, and today I'm a fractional CMO.
Wow. Okay. So obviously it wasn't like an overnight building of that, but what we want to unpack today is kind of how you went from no followers to 10 to 100 to 1,000 to 85,000 across two platforms. And I don't want to leave out the fact that you have over 14,000 newsletter subscribers, email newsletter subscribers. So let's kind of start at the bottom there. When you wanted to bring that information from the boardroom to the general public, was your mindset of, hey, I'm just going to start putting this out there and see what happens? Or were you I've got to get followers is my thing. I got to start building those.
I started with the first one, right? I was hey, I have these gems, right? They're frameworks that solve problems for real people. I want to put on the internet, have people find them. But I did have this kind of in the back of my mind, as I thought that it was so unique and so rare, in air quotes, that it would go crazy viral. And I expected to, every time I post, I was I expect this to go viral overnight. And man, I'm telling you, I was sitting there on Twitter and I couldn't break 7 followers. Right, 7, to the point where I was so frustrated that I would go into communities and Slacks and Discords and find people and make friends with people on Discord and ask them to follow me on Twitter. Right?
There you go.
So it was bad.
You got to start somewhere.
I had to start somewhere, yeah. So it helped me figure out that you can have great ideas, but writing for the internet is so different than writing for work, right? If I email you, for example, right, you've asked me for that thing. And so you're going to read it, even if it's kind of formatted bad and not in a good story and all that kind of stuff. But people who are scrolling on Twitter can either read your thing or watch cat videos. And so how do you make your writing more interesting than cat videos, basically? And that's what I had to crack to finally scale the thing.
How'd you do that? Well, I like it doesn't, did you have any copywriting background? Was it just kind of learning by seeing what others are doing?
Dude, when I had 7 followers, I thought copywriting was a legal term. Right? Like,
Yep.
I'd never heard of it, right? I had no idea what copywriting was. I thought storytelling was a joke, right? Like in the sense that like there's a bit of a Dunning-Kruger effect where with storytelling, you think you tell stories at parties, and so you think you must be good at it. People laugh at your jokes, they listen to your stories, and so you must be good at it. I didn't know how much goes into storytelling. I had no idea how to write things in a way that strangers on the internet will actually want to listen to you and pay attention to you, and eventually scale, like build that at mass and turn that into customers. And so that was a huge learning curve, massive learning curve. I think I read every book I could on storytelling and copywriting. Like I didn't take weekends off for a year.
Yeah.
And I just because I had my day job, I was studying from 5 a.m. to daytime, and then at night when I signed off until 11 p.m. and just repeat.
Yeah, dude. So myself coming from the world of copywriting and being pretty connected in there, it's when I first started learning about the importance of A, building a following, but B, writing well and having something to say and value to provide, but also making it entertaining. It makes an incredible difference. And there's guys out there like Chris Orzakowski, Kieran Drew, Dennis McGovern, like these really good writers who have, whether they're newsletters or just email their lists on a regular basis, they use the use of story is incredible because it hooks you in, it keeps you interested, it keeps you entertained. And then there's usually always something to be sold, right? Like it's story selling in a way. Not with every single email, but a couple of those guys will be like, yeah, you got to sell in every email. But you're providing all of these things through copywriting, and it's just fascinating. And whether it's across platforms or through email or all of it, it's an incredible skill to build.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's important to define what writing well means, right? Like I wrote well in air quotes for the corporate life, but writing well in corporate is just how logical can you be so someone can be really clear on your action and follow your logic, etc. But you take that same writing that I don't know executives rave about and drop that onto Twitter and you'll get crickets. And so you have to reframe what writing well means, and it's writing in a way that like takes little effort to consume, that like is entertaining for people. There's stakes involved, there's lessons learned in a way that everyone can consume and want to share with their friends.
Right. There's, I can't remember if it was Howard Gossage or someone had one of the old time Mad Men advertisers who was like the god of ad writing, had a line that was like, people, was it? People love reading, and sometimes they love reading something that's an ad. I'm butchering the quote, but it's basically like the through the power of copywriting, you can get some incredible points across just by being a great writer.
Absolutely. I mean, the best ads don't look like ads,
Right.
The best stories, in my opinion, don't feel like effort. And so, like, just take one tactical example, that the level of your writing should be a lot lower grade wise than you think. So what I mean by that is like when I first started writing on the internet, there's this app called the Hemingway app that says what grade level do you have to graduate from to be able to read your writing, right?
Yeah.
And I have this fluffy consulting background where everyone makes fun of you for using these big words to confuse people. And so my writing was, I think it was 12th, 13th grade when I joined. No wonder people didn't like read what I was writing. And so now looking back on it, I laugh. And my goal now is to have all my writing. I drop it into Hemingway app after I write it and just check the grade. And so you only have to have graduated 3rd grade now, right, to be able to read that. That just makes it so much. If you can take a really complicated idea and explain it simply, that's what goes viral, you know?
Yeah, and you don't come off as you're someone who's holding a teacup with their pinky out and going, yes, the TPS reports are on par today. You know, like if you come across like that, like you said, if your reading level is making it look like you're in the 38th grade, like that's not going to be interesting to the majority of people. It's just not.
Yeah. And not only that, I mean, just the amount of effort it takes to read that big, voracious sentence. I made up that word.
There you go. There's the consultant coming out.
But the amount of effort it takes to read that means that like you will lose a lot of people who could read it but just don't want to put an effort. The best, I think there was, who's that copywriter who has that slippery, Joe Sugarman. Legendary copywriter has this idea, it's called the slippery slope. And the slippery slope is just, hey, you make that first sentence so easy to read that you just naturally flip to the second sentence. And you make that sentence so easy to read, you naturally flip to the third sentence, right? And then you start pulling in stakes to keep them in there. And when you combine that flow, like someone starts reading the first sentence and just by accident, they just got hooked and they slipped down that slippery slide all the way to the end and read everything you asked them to do.
Yeah, yeah, it's incredible. So when you were getting into this, you're starting to sharpen your writing talents here, your writing abilities, starting to gain a few followers. So at what point did you kind of start thinking about, your reach versus your trust with people? Because I think it's really easy even for myself to look at something like, oh, this guy's got 85,000 followers, you know, but are these all 85,000 people? Are they engaged? Are they actually trusting this person, or they just think his stuff is okay, right? And then that's before we even talk about monetizing this, right? Like, it's one thing to have 1 million followers, but if you don't squeeze a dime from 1 million followers based on what your business is, of course, like, what are you doing?
Right. Yeah, and I have some friends who have close to 1 million followers, and they can't sell a thing, right? And then I have friends on the other side who have 1,000 to 2,000 followers, and they're making $1 million a year, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's a real thing. I think if you're trying to create content online, you got to ask yourself on the spectrum of, am I doing this to be famous, or am I doing this to make money? And that's a spectrum, by the way. That's not a one or the other. And that will change what type of content you do and how you write it. I do think the answer is a balance in between, because, like I was saying before, the vanity metrics, or like number of followers and how viral your things go, is amazing for social proof and to create connections and get you on the phone with the right people. It opens doors. I'm sitting here, like I've built the business I've built through connections I've had through socials, right? And I don't think I would have made those connections if I'd just gone for the making money approach rather than like the blend of virality and money.
Right. So I'm gonna bring it back. I'm going squirrel brain on you here. But when you were closer to the beginning and you were starting out, you were sharing these frameworks. How would you say your writing and your topics or your themes would shift? Like, what did you shift them towards? What were you talking about? Like, I think a lot of people wonder, like, man, how do they come up with this content? Like, that's a common thing. There's a million different ways to dissect that question. But for you, what did it look like as you started evolving, as you started gaining 1,000, 2,000 followers? Did what you talked about shift in any different direction?
Yeah, and I mean, I can tell you the origin of it, and then I have completely different theories today. So we can jam on what Brian today looking back wants to think. But at the beginning, I was learning to write, and so I saw it as an exercise to learn to write. And so I did a lot of analysis of companies and how they grow, right? And so what I did at the time to get the first 100 is the hardest. Then the first 1,000 is really, really hard, because you need social proof to get social proof, so there's this cold start problem, really hard. But anyway, so what kind of content I write at the beginning? I would look for interesting stories about businesses and then use my insider lens, I guess, to kind of analyze it and add lessons and that kind of stuff. And I think finding interestingness is an acquired skill. That I think was a very hard thing to do. So finding the right topic, finding the right angle, and then writing about it in a way that people will actually pay attention, listen to, and think it's smart yet entertaining. Cracking that nut was the one thing that took me through to the end.
Yeah. And at this point in your career, were you still a consultant when you were doing this, or was there a point where you hit the jumping off point when you hopped into your own consultancy and then becoming a fractional CMO?
Yeah. So I was still a consultant.
Okay.
I was a consultant for about a year while I was building this. But I also at the time wasn't like the consulting on the side and the businesses I run today were kind of a byproduct of the audience, if that makes sense. Like my purpose for writing things online was just to share frameworks with business owners that I felt like didn't have access to it. It was almost like leveling the playing field, I called it, for business owners. And so I basically started, the first part of my journey was learning how to write for the internet, right? And so it was actually less stories about me and more stories that I found of corporations, what their strategy is, and then as an inside strategy consultant, what's my opinion on it. Then once I crossed that kind of 1,000 follower threshold, I started layering in my own stories. And I thought the most interesting part about my own stories was the reach would not be as viral, right? If I wrote something about Steve Jobs, everybody knows Steve Jobs, the image of Steve Jobs, they click on it, they read it, it goes crazy viral, right? 1,000, 2,000 likes. Brian O'Connor his opinion on consulting doesn't go as viral, right? But the calls booked from that, the number of newsletter subscribers from that was crazy. So, give you one example. Most my newsletters, roughly from Twitter, of everyone who looks at the tweet that has the call to action on it, it's probably like a 5 to 6% conversion rate on most stories where it's like, hey, here's how Steve Jobs thinks about it. The tweet I put out about my story and how I went from, or how I built an audience online, or things that I actually did in consulting, the conversion to newsletter on that same call to action tweet is 60%. Think about that difference. 60% of people who see that tweet click the call to action to sign up for my newsletter.
Wow.
Yeah, isn't that insane?
Yeah, that is wild. Is this the same across LinkedIn as well?
I wasn't tracking the metrics as closely on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a different animal. LinkedIn has its own kind of nuances for sure that we can get into. For example, just to throw one out there, if I put quotes, 10 Richard Branson quotes, right, to make you think about management or whatever, right? On Twitter, that'll go viral. I'll get a bunch of followers from it, but few conversion to either meetings booked or newsletter, right? Newsletter, actually some, but I would say it's most followers, then newsletters, and then last calls, right? I would get no calls from that. On LinkedIn, because people click on your profile, which is essentially a landing page, I actually get a lot of calls booked from 10 quotes from Branson. And that same type of content would not get me calls booked on Twitter, just because of that landing page element that's built into LinkedIn that Twitter doesn't have.
Interesting. Yeah, I know. So I've had multiple guys on the podcast here that say I need to get on Twitter. So that's still in my hip pocket to work on, but my main focus is on LinkedIn. And I find that the algorithm is fascinating as to what it chooses to promote and what it doesn't. Because I'll have some posts where I'll think they're like, oh, that was a pretty decent post. And oh, look, I've got some like pretty solid engagement on it and comments on it. Exactly what LinkedIn wants to see. They want to see people liking it and they want to see people commenting on it. And usually, and these are usually a few larger folks in my network with a larger following, but I'm starting to realize like it totally depends on how the algorithm, it seems like, is feeling that day. Because let's say this guy has 10,000 followers. He commented on this. He liked it. I have to believe that there's a certain amount of his 10,000 followers who are now going to see his like and comment on my post. That's kind of the whole idea behind how you can grow pretty well on LinkedIn. But then it totally, totally depends. Like there's no rhyme or reason for me. Like one post will go, I'll get 3,000 impressions on it and I'll have a ton of likes and comments and it'll go around the globe. But that's usually if I'm posting something that's more about my story or more like when I mentioned how my fourth kid was born, like that post went absolutely berserk. But then when I have posts about more things in my marketing realm or things that are very relevant to business owners, I think it's the same as you because that doesn't necessarily go very far, but I'll generate phone calls from it.
Yes.
But it's hit or miss. It's crazy.
Yeah, and we can get in the weeds on that if that's helpful to you. Because take your kids example, right? Kids versus let's just use like how to build a landing page topic. Just make that up. The kids example applies to so many more people that when you first post, the way it works, when you first post on LinkedIn, LinkedIn shows it to a few people. It's like, hey, is this content good? Right? They want to do like basically they're creating an MVP on content, and by pumping a few people, like, is this good? If it applies to more people engage with it, it goes more viral, right? I mean, there's algorithm type things that I think are small. We can talk about the algo type things. Like for example, like a comment does more impact to reach than a like, right? And LinkedIn only weighs the first action, right? They won't, if you like it post before you comment, it won't go as far as if you comment before you like, right?
Really?
Yeah, wild stuff like that.
Fascinating.
I think is more of a distraction than useful.
Yeah.
I still do it out of like sheer just trying to optimize it, but is it that useful? Not really. I think the better way of doing it is thinking about what the audience needs and what your goal is with it, right? So take if you want marketing type things to go viral, you need to essentially build enough of a base of people who, when LinkedIn shows your first tier of people your posts, they all engage with it and go wild, right? And so that's what, like, I think distribution is really important on LinkedIn. and that you build distribution in the comments and in the DMs.
Right. Right. Absolutely. And in your experience, how does that vary between the platforms with Twitter and with LinkedIn? So what you just described with LinkedIn, is that completely out the window at Twitter?
No, same concept. I think the
Okay.
main Twitter and LinkedIn are the only two platforms I can think of where distribution is super important, right? And the way I describe distribution is you can have the best post in the world, but if nobody knows it's out there, then it goes crickets, right? And so I think you need two things to succeed on LinkedIn and Twitter. One's great content, the other's great distribution. So let's talk about great content first. What's great content? Well, great content is a topic people find interesting, written in an angle that makes it very interesting, right? But then also written in a way that's low effort to consume, right? So like spacing in between your sentences, very short sentences, third grade type writing, right? Third grade level writing, right? But then also shareable, right? And so shareable is something that makes you feel smart when you share it. And so if you hit those four things, you have great content, right? We can dive into any of those four things as your questions for sure. On the great distribution side, that's building enough people who have your target customer in their audience, right? That can share or engage with in any way your posts. And so if you have a topic that's hot, written in an angle that's interesting, with a hook, obviously, that brings people in, and then the post is written in a way that's low effort to consume, yet entertaining, and has stakes and all that kind of stuff, and people feel smart sharing it, want to show off that they know these types of things, you'll have great content ready and ripe to go viral. And then if you have a ton of people, and this takes a long time to build, you have a ton of people who can share it with their audiences, then that's the recipe for virality.
I love it. Do you write like you talk?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. That took me a second to think about because I want to make sure I answer that right. I will say the difference is I write shorter sentences than I talk.
Okay.
So short sentences are impactful. The way I think about it is if you have an idea and you tell that idea in long sentences, it takes you 3 minutes to convey that idea, it feels kind of like not that interesting to share, long-winded, all that kind of stuff. But if I take that same idea and pack that into 5 words, every single word packs such a punch that is powerful.
Yeah.
Right. And so I do write the way I talk in the way that I say anyway, and so, and all these kind of things that I would say in normal life. But I will say I use shorter sentences and try to make it as compactful as possible. Compactful, I guess, is a new word today. As compactful as possible, so that every word packs a punch and people want to share that.
Yeah, because I think I noticed, and I've gotten this question from people who follow me, is my writing style is very much where I always try to get better because I am a long-winded person, but when it comes to writing, be succinct as you can, but also inject your personality into your writing. I think a lot of people get this mindset that, oh, I can't be me when I'm writing. I have to be what my people want, or the people I want to reach. I want to be what they want me to be. But I think the point that gets missed a lot is people who follow you because you are you, right? If that makes sense, where they value what you say because you believe it, and that's what's building trust with them. But I think you can tell when somebody's writing just like how they think I want them to write. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think if you write the way that you think your people want to listen to, you just become like everyone else, right? You're kind of hiding your personality, hiding all that kind of stuff, and you'll just get lost in the sea of people. One of the best, if you want your personality to shine through, obviously, like if you talk a certain way, write like you talk. The other thing, this framework I saw from Ali Abdaal, I'm obsessed with, right? It's called primal branding, if you're familiar with that. Mm-hmm. Primal branding is just, I believe it's 7 different elements that make up a brand, right? And they're things like, they're just beliefs, right? It's like, what things do you hate or what do you go against, right? What are your anti-beliefs? What do you believe? What else is in there? What's your origin story? What are things that you repeat all the time? And what I like to do is I take there's 7 branding elements. And if you sneak in a few of those things into every post, by the time someone's read 3 or 4 of your things, they know what makes up Brian in this case, right? They know what makes up you. And so if you can sneak in those things and say it in a way that's unique to you and how you speak, people start to remember you.
I want to ask you about your newsletter. I kind of want to shift towards that because email newsletters, they feel pretty in vogue these days. Maybe because I'm just in the world of email and newsletters all the time. But There's some really awesome ones out there, really impactful ones, and it sounds like the coolest people have a newsletter, yourself included. So, how did you or when did you start your newsletter?
I think the biggest, so I started it when I realized that you're susceptible to the algorithm, right? So I was on Twitter back when it was called Twitter. And so
Mm-hmm.
I went through the whole ups and downs. And so I think the main thing was I was going viral pretty consistently, I'd say. And I felt like that I just needed Twitter and I was good. But then there's also time periods where the algo just stops pushing you. And so you go through a dry spell. And what I realized was social media is an amazing way to reach a ton of new people, right? But a terrible way to consistently reach those people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Email is the opposite, where there's no algorithm to fight, assuming, forget deliverability for a second. There's no algorithm to fight against. Like if you hit, I have 14,000 readers, I hit send on 14,000, I hit send and 14,000 inboxes receive it, ish. Forget deliverability. And so when I realized that, that's when I started building my list because I can two things can happen. One is I can build a relationship with people because they get my content every single week. And then two is I can go more in depth and kind of nerd out. And so people get to really know who you are at a deeper level.
Yeah, yeah, I love it. It's so I've been on a handful of newsletters for the last 7 years. The few people that I stick on and I, really truly value what they send. And the impact is incredible. Not just through the amount of money I've paid them through whether it's courses or selling or coaching communities, whatever it might be, but the ability to monetize via your email list is absolutely unreal if you do it right, of course. Now, I think a
Right.
lot of people, and tell me if this is, it sounds a little bit like how you've done it, but you use the advantages of social media to gather new people, right? You said it's incredible for finding new people, but then it's a matter of getting them and siloing them into your list and then letting them, self reduce in that fashion. If they like you, they'll stay on your list, they'll read your stuff. At some point in time, they're probably going to spend some money with you for something, right? Depending on who you are and what your business is. But when was it that, or I guess, when did you realize that your email list, or maybe a better question is, how did you start monetizing that list and turning it into something that became an asset for you?
Yeah. I think a lot of people try to monetize with ads, right? They say
Mm-hmm.
like, hey, I'm building this list, a lot of attention, I'll just use ads. I'm not a fan of ads. I think ads should be icing on the cake, not the cake itself.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason being is because I am so proud of the quality of my services and products. Like I can control that. I know what's a good fit for everyone else. When you start to do ads every week and you don't know what the quality of the service that you're promoting, I'm not a fan of that. The other thing I'm not a fan of is also you don't know always how many people are going to click and how many people are going to convert. And so when you promise something to an advertiser and you don't know what they're going to get, that's hard for me too because I always like to over deliver, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so when I realized that, I started focusing on just my own products and services. So in terms of products, I tried info products at first. That didn't work for me. The reason that info products didn't work for me is because I had a newsletter that was focused on corporate strategy to corporations, right? And so will a executive who's trying to decide whether they should build an investment bank in Brazil download a Notion doc that explains to them how to do that? That didn't work. so,
Yeah.
so I essentially had a choice. It was at the time I was in Thailand, right? I was checking out Asia. And so my choice was, do I go back to the States or not back to the States, but back to this time zone and build a service instead of products to corporations, or do I switch my audience to small business, to like the smallest business, and stick to products? And the reason that I ended up having that surprised me too, because I was writing about strategy to small business, and so you think like, oh, I'm writing strategy to small business. Your audience must be all small business owners. It was, but the people who were most excited about it were the strategists, because I was talking about corporate strategy. Corporate strategists were the one most interested, and so I had a blend of kind of corporations listening to what I was writing, and then small businesses. So anyway, I tried monetizing through info products. There was a mismatch between my audience and the product I was delivering, the form that the product was going in. I ended up deciding I was really good at consulting. I'm going to do consulting services, and that's where I really started to monetize. That's when my monetization took off.
Wow. Okay. So are your newsletters built around the fact that you're sharing your knowledge, you're providing value? Is it just you implying that, hey, you've been reading me for a while, I'm an authority and they'll come to me? Or do you have, like, do you create a lot of offers that you make clear as day in your writing, or you blend them into your writing and it's part of what you do and part of that value proposal?
Yeah. So what I do is today, right? Back then was me figuring it out. Right now, today, I've had it long enough that we're cracking it. Is I'm very built in public, right? Like you read my newsletter, you see the challenges that we've had in the business, how we've solved it, like specific metrics that we have, et cetera, right? You get to see revenue, gross margin, et cetera. And so when I talk about systems too, the systems that we use to solve it, the systems are about the talent business, right? And so without the best ads are don't feel like ads. And so the whole newsletter is just how does Talent HQ solve this problem that you can solve too and steal this framework. But by the end of it, you finish reading it, you have this awesome solution to a problem you probably had too. But the whole example the whole time was about my talent business. And so it's an ad without being an ad.
I love that.
Yeah.
Do you think that every entrepreneur should build an audience?
No.
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 Why is that?
I think it's hard for one, and hard doesn't make it a bad thing. It's just harder than people think. But I think there's a lot of channels out there, and channels like an audience is just one of them, right? So like inbound organic is one customer acquisition channel. Paid is another acquisition channel, right? Outbound, we're currently building an outbound system for our business too. That's another great acquisition channel. And so it depends on the stage of your business, what your goals are for your business. It might make sense for you, it might not. Everyone's different.
And before we hit record, we were talking about kind of the difference between the platforms and the type of engagement or followership that you get. I think the example used is you said you'd rather have 100,000 YouTube followers than 100,000 TikTok followers. Explain to me why that is.
So if you're, okay, imagine if you're trying to build, if you want to build an audience, right? You want to essentially make them customers. You're building a customer base, not a follower base, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're interested in building a customer base, the way you build a customer is first imagine they've never heard of you before and they need to now be aware of your existence, right? So it's awareness first. Then they're like, oh, you exist. Now, do I trust this person? Do I think this person, what's the chances that this person can deliver on what they're promising? That's the whole trust thing. And I think awareness, once you learn copywriting and storytelling, isn't that hard. I think building trust is very hard. And so the way you build trust, the more that they hear you, see you, think you're a real human, see examples of things you've done, that's one way to build trust. And so when we're talking about different platforms, so I started on Twitter and LinkedIn, for example. That's a completely text-based platform, right? And that's a very low amount of trust. Mm-hmm. They have to see a lot of your content before you'll be able to convert. But if you have a video in there, now they see you, they feel like they've hung out with you, right? That's going to be more trust.
Right.
And so the two extremes are, let's use a LinkedIn post versus YouTube video. On a LinkedIn post, someone's just read your text. They don't know what you look like. It's hard to create that human feeling, human element in text, right? On the other extreme, imagine a 15-minute YouTube video where you feel like, without realizing, you watch 15 minutes of how I interact and you think you've hung out with me for 15 minutes. You hear me think, right? That's hard to fake. And so you have more trust built from that one YouTube video than you would 7 LinkedIn posts, whatever I made up the number. And so as you build out your marketing ecosystem, and that's what I do with my CMO business, you have to take into account the whole funnel. Like, how are you able to build traction after someone's seen you?
Right, exactly. And I think that's just inherent of the platforms themselves. Is YouTube is a video platform, and video naturally builds know, like, and trust at least a little bit faster than something that's text-based. And it's also, you mentioned long form. So most YouTube videos are a couple minutes to 30 minutes to an hour to whatever, right? They're longer form. Whereas opposed to like TikTok or Instagram or Reels or Stories, those are quick hits, right? Like if you have to like get your point in within 15 seconds. That's why, the virality of garbage on TikTok is so easy to do, whether it's garbage or good stuff. It's easier to do because the whole point is that you get in there and you quickly grab somebody's attention. But that's no way to build their attention because right after that, they're swiping on to something else. But if they're on your YouTube, now they're engaged. And if it's a 15-minute video or 30-minute video, like you said, there's no way that they can't start to understand who you are and decide if they are going to continue to know, like, and trust you.
Right. Yeah. But even you can create YouTube, you can create video formats on LinkedIn. So I'll give you an example. My highest converting post, and converting, I mean, into a call on LinkedIn, I made a video, right? It was a video about how do you position your business. And that video did terrible, air quotes, by all vanity metrics, right? I got like, I don't know, 17 likes, something like that. But on the back end, I got 7 calls booked from one video, right? And so I found, not always, but there tends to be an inverse correlation between how viral a post goes and how many calls it get booked, right?
Right.
And so video is an awesome way to really build trust for sure.
Absolutely.
Short form video is a little more iffy. Short form videos are amazing for awareness, bad for trust. And so one of the best funnels I've ever seen was someone who figured out how to go viral on TikTok, right? Built awareness, drove a ton of traffic to their landing page or to the TikTok profile. And from their TikTok profile, said, hey, great, if you want this type of stuff, follow me on Instagram. And so basically the funnel was a ton of awareness on TikTok, drove all the traffic to Instagram. And on Instagram, he used the story feature to create a story, right? Ironically, you told stories in the story in your Instagram stories, right?
Imagine that.
But that story leads to a sale, right? And so the way it works is it's story 1 is a problem. I understand you. Here's the problem. Story 2 is how we solve it. Story 3 is here's the action, right? Book a call.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So if you're an entrepreneur and you're starting out and you feel like building an audience is right for you or it's right for your business, maybe it's part of your personality, like this is something for me and I want to be a part of this. What's your advice on picking a platform? Where do you start? There's so many options.
Right. I think it's a blend of two things. One, who's your customer, right? Is it B2B? Is it B2C, right? If it's B2B, something like LinkedIn is probably a better choice. If it's B2C, something like Instagram, TikTok could be a choice. Then the other thing is what do you like? Because the best platform is the platform you actually use, right? Let's say like Instagram's amazing for you, but you hate video and you hate imagery. You'd rather write, then like it won't work out well for you because you won't put in all the effort. It's a blend of what works best for you. Like, do you prefer text? Do you prefer audio? Do you prefer video? And then where's your customer?
I love it. And we're coming up on time here. I want to make sure I land the plane for you because you're a busy man. But I want to make sure we point out that you building your businesses and building your audience, we mentioned it at the top, but I don't want to glaze over the fact that being a digital nomad, you've been to and through 20 countries. You're currently down in Argentina. What was it like doing all this while you were, gallivanting the globe?
I think a lot of people struggle with it in terms of like finding the balance because you're in a new city all the time. How do you find the time to work? I think because I was a management consultant before, I actually never really had a home for long. Like I'm 32 and I've only had an apartment that's mine for 1 year, right? And so I'm just so used to it from consulting that like all the change has become routine. And so every time I go to a new city, I know I have a checklist basically of all the things that I do, and work is always a priority. Right. And so because work, first off, I love it. And so just loving what you do is a great way to always want to improve it and all that kind of stuff. But on the other side, work is what enables us to live the life you want to live. And so if you can create one of the biggest reasons that I love entrepreneurship versus the corporate life is, one, you can create the lifestyle you want to live, both offline because of the work you've done, but then also you can design the type of work that you just love to do.
Yeah, that's awesome. So what's been your favorite country or favorite city that you've been in?
That's a hard one. I love Medellin, Colombia. That's up there. I'm heading back in a few weeks.
Okay.
Being is up there. Also, Bali. Bali, surprisingly, Bali shocked me with how many entrepreneurs there are. I would say the number of ambitious entrepreneurs I've met in Bali that just energized me to build the business was insane. Yeah.
Wow. On a random tiny island in the Pacific. That's crazy.
I know. It's interesting. I think Bali just brings a lot of people who say, hey, I'm doing this cool thing. Why not just do it from a cool place?
Yeah. No, I love that. And as long as you get an internet connection, it's incredible the things you can do in business with just an internet connection.
It's amazing. It's been great because, I'll look to my left and just to give you an example, I was in Ecuador a few months ago. I have a talent business and I looked to my left and it was the largest digital marketing influencer on YouTube in Latin America, right? So I just look at them like, we need a partnership, and we made a partnership, right? Or like I'll be surrounded by agency owners and I'll turn and all of a sudden we have a new, like we can help them find talent. And so the people next to me are the people who are helping make the business a reality.
Yeah.
And so it's awesome.
The opportunity is everywhere. I mean, you and I being entrepreneurs, I know it's everywhere. You know it's everywhere. But I think that's something that so many folks who are not quite in entrepreneurship yet, that you don't realize the incredible world around us that entrepreneurship can bring and the incredible opportunities. And that ties perfectly back into building an audience, because I know, like you've said, a lot of your businesses or partners or ideas have come from the relationships that you've built through your social media and through your email lists. So maybe that's a perfect place to bookend this, because the opportunities abound. And if you put yourself out there and you just be you, it's incredible what can happen.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think social media is social, right? Like it's a place to meet people, and people become your customers and partners, right? And so I didn't think about it as I'm building a social audience or meeting people on socials so I can use it in a greedy way for money. It was, I just want to help people, right? And I think that vibe, especially on Twitter, I think Twitter's the best for this, is people just want to help people. You know, they want to meet cool people, do cool things with cool people. And that's one thing I loved about entrepreneurship. And if you bring that mentality to socials, people feel that and want to help you, and then rising tide lifts all ship.
You take it from the kind of the traditional mindset of everything is transactional in business to it's not transactional, it's relational. It's all about relationships. And when you're doing the right thing, you're providing value, you're helping people, you're providing the solution that you're outfitted to give. You're going to build these relationships and the money will come, right? It's kind of like karma. You put good out, good's going to come back. And I think that's a really cool thing about entrepreneurship nowadays, at least in my estimation, is there's so many people out there who have that mindset shift of, I'm here to build a relationship. If we end up working together and buying from each other and one or both of us make money, that's fantastic. But the relationship is coming first. So I think that's a really cool thing about entrepreneurship these days.
Absolutely. And I'll even add, like, from our talent business, I mentioned this last time, 70% of our clients come back and buy more, right? Mm-hmm. And part of the reason is I see it as a long-term relationship. Like, it costs us, what, $1,000 to acquire a customer, right? Not on inbound, but, roughly. Mm-hmm. And so if they come back and buy more because we've helped them out so much and given so much to that person, then the second time they buy, now it's $500 customer, right? The third time they buy, like, it keeps going half. And so it just makes sense to help people because you're in it for the long run.
Right.
Like, I'm not trying to make cash today. We're building a long-term relationship because I want to help you so much that you just keep wanting to come back for more.
Exactly. Why would I want to look at this as transactional and make some money off the top, then never talk to you again, or not even serve you correctly or well? It should feel icky, and I hope it does for the majority of people.
Yeah. I mean, your current customer base are the people who trust you, know you the most. It's the easiest to form a relationship, to keep helping and giving back to them. Mm-hmm. And so just creating such a good giving relationship is the best way to build a business.
Yeah. And it'll instantly set you apart from the masses.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, I think that's the perfect place to land this plane. I think we just uncovered some golden nuggets right at the very end there. So I love it. All right, Brian, I want to make sure that all of our listeners can get a hold of you if they want to reach out, they want to chat, they want to get to know you. If they need help on the talent side of their business, if they need help on the fractional CMO side of things, if they have questions about being a digital nomad, and of course, the big thing we talked about today, building a following online, what is the best way that they can do that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So my newsletter is outliergrowth.com. My talent business is talenthq.co. And if you sign up for my newsletter, say hi. Like, I'm here to help people. It's actually me replying. I would love to meet anyone listening to this.
I love that. I think that's the funniest thing, because on my email list, it's like, actually, no, please reply. I'd love to hear back. I'd love feedback. Even if you want me to go pound sand, please reply and tell me. Like, that's, as people who produce this type of this medium, I know, I presume you're in the same boat. Like, just hit reply. Let me know what you think.
It's funny. I think people believe I actually learned that this week. I reach out to, when people follow me on Twitter, I say hi, right? And people stopped responding at a certain point. I wondered why. And I think it's because of the size of the audience. People assume that it's not me and it's automated.
Oh, yeah.
But it literally is me, and I just want to say hi to people. I want to know who's following me, who's my audience.
Yeah, no, that's so funny. Yeah, because I could see that where it's just like, it's probably AI or an assistant or something. It's like, no, it's me. Like, I'd love to chat. Like, this is how we build relationships. So, yeah. All right. Yeah. Awesome. Well, Brian, this has been fantastic. Everybody out there, go give Brian a follow. give him a listen here on the podcast, of course, and then check out his newsletter. Man, thank you again for joining me. This has been so much fun.
Yeah, love jamming with you, Brad.
All right.